As her lover, the 37 million she left belongs to me, he said, at my daughter's funeral. Can you imagine? Can you picture standing there, watching your child being lowered into the ground and hearing those words? The same man who abandoned her when she was at her weakest stood there, dressed in black, pretending to grieve, and demanding what she built with her own tears, her own blood, her own sleepless nights. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by his expensive suit jacket and shake him until his teeth rattled. I wanted to tell everyone in that church what kind of monster he really was. But I couldn't, because my daughter was lying in that coffin, and I had promised her one thing: I would protect what she left behind. He smirked as if he'd already won. As if my grief made me weak. As if being 67 years old meant I was helpless. As if losing the most precious thing in my world meant I would just roll over and let him steal her legacy. But when he saw who was standing behind me, his smug smile vanished instantly. Before I tell you what happened next, make sure you subscribe, like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this is the story of how a grieving mother turned pain into power and made her daughter's ex wish he'd never come back. Let me tell you about my Isabella. Let me tell you about the miracle I raised, the daughter who was everything good in this broken world. I'm Margaret, 67 years old, and I spent 35 years teaching children in Chicago public schools. When Isabella's father died in a car accident when she was only 3, people told me I should remarry. They said a girl needs a father figure. But Isabella and I? We didn't need anyone else. We were each other's world. She was brilliant, not just smart, but brilliant in the way that lights up a room. Even as a little girl, she would sketch dress designs on napkins during dinner. She'd take my old scarves and turn them into these elaborate outfits for her dolls. By the time she was 16, she was altering her own clothes, making them look like they came from the most expensive boutiques in the city. Mom, she'd say, someday I'm going to have my own fashion empire. And you're going to be my business partner. I laughed. But Isabella never joked about her dreams. She worked 2 jobs through college, saved every penny, and by 25, she had opened her first boutique in Chicago. Not some tiny hole-in-the-wall shop, a real boutique with gorgeous window displays and clothes that made women feel beautiful. Within 5 years, she had expanded to Miami. Within 8 years, she was worth millions. My daughter built an empire from nothing. From sketches on napkins and secondhand sewing machines and 17-hour workdays that left her exhausted, but glowing with purpose. And then she met Mark Ellison. God, how I wish she never had. He was 34, she was 28. Smooth-talking, charming, always wearing expensive suits and driving cars that cost more than most people's houses. He called himself an investor, said he was interested in helping her expand her business internationally. I met him once at Sunday dinner. Something about him made my skin crawl, the way he looked around our modest house like he was calculating its value, the way he talked about Isabella's success like he had something to do with it. Your daughter has quite the little business, he said to me, cutting his steak with surgical precision. With the right guidance, she could really make something of herself. The right guidance. As if Isabella hadn't already made something extraordinary of herself. But Isabella was in love. She glowed when she talked about him. She started wearing more expensive jewelry, took trips to New York and Los Angeles that he planned. She was happy, and that's all I ever wanted for her. Until she called me crying at 2 in the morning. Mom, I'm pregnant. I could hear the joy and terror in her voice. She was scared, but she was excited. She'd always wanted children, always talked about the family she would have someday. What did Mark say? I asked. The silence on the other end of the phone told me everything. He needs time to process it, she whispered. 3 days later, Mark vanished. Overnight. Like smoke. But he didn't just leave, he stole from her. $60,000 from their joint business account that she had set up to expand her Miami location. Money she had saved for years, money she needed for inventory and rent and the baby that was coming. Isabella was 8 weeks pregnant when she found out he was gone. She was 12 weeks pregnant when she lost the baby. The doctors said it was stress. The stress of being abandoned, of losing her savings, of realizing that the man she loved had never loved her at all, just her bank account. I held my daughter in that hospital bed as she sobbed. Not just from the physical pain, but from the betrayal. From the knowledge that she had been nothing more than a mark to him. "I'll never let another man hurt me like this," she whispered. "Never again." And she didn't. For the next 9 years, Isabella threw herself into her business with a fierce determination that both amazed and worried me. She worked 18-hour days. She expanded to 3 more cities. She became ruthless in negotiations, brilliant in her strategies. By the time she was 37, she was worth $37 million. But she never fell in love again. She never let anyone close enough to hurt her the way Mark had. And then the cancer came. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 by the time they found it. The doctors gave her 6 months. She lived for 8, fighting every single day, determined to see one more fashion show, approve one more design, sign one more business deal. In her last week, when she was so weak she could barely lift her head, she called me to her bedside. Her voice was just a whisper, but her eyes were still fierce, still full of that determination that had carried her through everything. "Mom," she said, pressing a sealed envelope into my hands. "If anything happens to me, everything I've built, every dollar, every dream belongs to you. Promise me you'll protect it. Isabella, you're going to be fine. Promise me, Mom. Promise me you'll protect what I built. Don't let anyone take it. Don't let anyone destroy what I created from nothing." I promised. How could I not promise my dying daughter anything she asked for? 3 days later, she was gone. And I thought the worst pain of my life was behind me. I was wrong. The church was so quiet you could hear people breathing. 200 people had come to say goodbye to Isabella, employees from her boutiques, models she had worked with, other business owners who respected what she had built, friends from college, neighbors who remembered her as the little girl who used to sell lemonade to raise money for her first sewing machine. I sat in the front pew, wearing the black dress Isabella had designed for me 2 Christmases ago. She always said I looked beautiful in black, that it made my silver hair look elegant instead of old. The service was almost over. The pastor was giving his final blessing. I was trying to memorize every word, because in a few minutes they would close the casket forever, and I would never see my daughter's face again. That's when I heard the church doors open. Heavy footsteps on marble floors. Whispers from the back pews. I turned around, and my blood turned to ice. Mark Ellison walked down the center aisle like he owned the place. He was wearing a black suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He even had the audacity to dab at his eyes with a handkerchief, as if he was overcome with grief. The nerve. The absolute, disgusting nerve of this man. He walked straight to the front of the church, past the people who actually knew and loved Isabella, past her employees who had worked for her for years, past me, her mother, and stood directly beside the casket. He placed his hand on the polished wood, closed his eyes, and spoke just loud enough for the entire church to hear. "As her lover, the 37 million she left belongs to me." Gasps echoed through the church. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The woman next to me grabbed my arm, steadying me as the room seemed to spin. He kept talking, his voice carrying that same smooth charm that had fooled my daughter 9 years ago. Isabella and I had rekindled our relationship before she passed. She would have wanted me to carry on her legacy, to make sure her business continues to grow. Lies. Every word was a lie, and he was telling them over my daughter's dead body. He leaned closer to the casket, and I saw his lips move. I couldn't hear what he whispered, but I saw him smile, a cold, calculating smile that made my skin crawl. I stood up, my legs shaking with rage and grief and disbelief. You abandoned her, Mark, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. You don't belong here. He turned to look at me, and for a moment, I saw the real Mark Ellison. Not the charming businessman, not the grieving lover, but the predator who had destroyed my daughter's heart and stolen her money and disappeared when she needed him most. He stepped closer to me, close enough that only I could hear his next words. Oh, I belong here more than you think. The funeral director was trying to restore order, ushering people toward the cemetery for the burial. But I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I kept staring at this man who had the audacity to show up at my daughter's funeral and claim her life's work as his own. As the mourners filed out, Mark walked beside the casket like he was the chief mourner. Like he was the one who had held Isabella's hand through chemotherapy treatments. Like he was the one who had watched her waste away, fighting until her last breath. I followed behind, my hands clenched into fists, wanting to scream, wanting to attack him, wanting to tell everyone the truth about what he had done to my daughter. But I couldn't make a scene at Isabella's funeral. I couldn't dishonor her memory with violence and shouting and the kind of drama she would have hated. So I walked in silence, making a promise to my daughter that I would not let this man destroy everything she had built. The cemetery was worse. At least in the church, there had been other people, witnesses, some semblance of dignity. But at the graveside, Mark took over completely. He stood at the head of the casket like he was the widower. He accepted condolences from people who didn't know any better. He even threw dirt onto the casket when it was lowered into the ground, like he had the right to participate in that final, sacred goodbye. I wanted to push him into the grave myself. When most of the mourners had left, when it was just family and close friends standing around the fresh mound of earth, Mark cornered me near the parking lot. We need to talk, he said, lighting a cigarette like we were having a casual conversation instead of standing beside my daughter's grave. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, fumbling for my car keys. I just wanted to go home, to lock my door, to grieve in private without this monster pretending to share my pain. Actually, there's $37 million to talk about, he said with that same cold smile. Under cohabitation law in Illinois, I can claim her estate as her domestic partner. I stared at him in disbelief. You left her 9 years ago. You destroyed her life. Maybe, he said, flicking ash onto the cemetery ground. But legally, I was still her partner. We had been discussing reconciliation before she died. I have emails, phone records, witnesses who saw us together. My heart sank. You're lying. Maybe I am. Maybe I'm not. But here's what I know for sure. I'll see you in court, Margaret. And when I do, I'm going to take everything your precious daughter built. Every boutique, every bank account, every piece of jewelry, every stick of furniture. He took a long drag of his cigarette, blew the smoke in my direction, and smiled. She should have been nicer to me when she had the chance. He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his expensive shoe, and walked away. I stood there in the parking lot, watching him drive away in his silver BMW, and I looked up at the darkening sky. Isabella, I whispered, my voice breaking with grief and rage. You told me to protect what's yours. I promise you, he'll never touch a cent. I don't care what it takes. I don't care how long it takes. He will not win. A cold wind blew across the cemetery, rustling the flowers on the fresh graves. For just a moment, I felt like Isabella was standing beside me, her hand on my shoulder, giving me the strength I would need for the battle ahead. Mark Ellison thought he was dealing with a broken old woman who would roll over and let him steal my daughter's legacy. He was about to learn that he had picked the wrong mother to mess with. The next morning, I was at the law office of Emma Clark at 8 o'clock sharp. Emma had been Isabella's attorney for 5 years, handling her business contracts and estate planning. She was sharp, in her mid-40s, with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that Isabella had always respected. I'm so sorry for your loss, Margaret, Emma said, pouring me coffee in her office overlooking downtown Chicago. Isabella was an incredible woman. Thank you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I'm not here to grieve. I'm here to fight. I told Emma everything that had happened at the funeral, every disgusting word that had come out of Mark's mouth. By the time I finished, Emma's expression had shifted from sympathy to professional fury. The will is airtight, she said, pulling out Isabella's file. Everything goes to you, with very specific language that excludes any romantic partners or business associates. But what? If he claims to be a long-term domestic partner, he can delay the inheritance for months, maybe years. He can tie up her assets in court while he tries to prove his claim. My stomach dropped. Can he win? Not if we can prove he's lying. But Margaret, court battles like this are expensive and emotionally devastating. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Isabella in that hospital bed, making me promise to protect what she had built. I thought about Mark's smug smile as he crushed his cigarette on cemetery ground. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. Emma nodded. Then we start building our case. We need to prove that Mark abandoned Isabella, that he stole from her, and that any recent contact was motivated by financial gain, not love. That afternoon, I drove to Isabella's office building in downtown Chicago. The Isabella Hope fashion headquarters took up 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper. Even in my grief, I felt proud walking through those glass doors, seeing my daughter's name in elegant silver letters on the wall. Grace Martinez had been Isabella's personal assistant for 4 years. She was 28, smart as a whip, and fiercely loyal to Isabella's memory. When I explained what Mark was trying to do, her face went white with rage. That bastard, she said, her professional composure cracking. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but that's exactly what he is. Tell me everything you know about his recent contact with Isabella. Grace pulled out a thick file folder. About 6 months ago, he started calling. At first, Isabella wouldn't take his calls, but he was persistent. He sent flowers, emails, even showed up here once. Did Isabella see him? Once. She agreed to meet him for coffee, thinking maybe he wanted to make amends for what he'd done years ago. She came back furious. Grace handed me a USB drive. Your daughter recorded their conversation. She was getting sicker, and she was worried about protecting her business from people who might try to take advantage. She recorded everything in her final months. That night, alone in my small apartment, I plugged in the USB drive with shaking hands. Isabella's voice filled the room, and for a moment, it was like she was sitting beside me again. But then I heard Mark's voice, and my blood ran cold. Isabella, I've changed. I know I hurt you, but I was young and stupid. I want to make things right. Make things right. Isabella's voice was weak from the chemotherapy, but the fury came through clearly. You left me pregnant and broke, Mark. You stole $60,000 from me. I was scared. I wasn't ready to be a father. But I've grown up and I want to help you now. Let me invest in your business, help you expand internationally. I don't need your help. I built this company without you. But you're sick, Isabella. What happens to everything you've built when you're gone? Your mother's an old woman. She can't run a multi-million-dollar company. My mother is stronger than you'll ever be. Maybe. But she's not a businesswoman. She'll lose everything within a year. The employees you care about will lose their jobs. Your legacy will crumble. There was a long pause. Then Isabella's voice, so tired but so determined. You left me with debt and shame, Mark. You'll never get anything from me. Not $1, not one decision, not one moment of my time. Then maybe your mother will be more reasonable, Mark replied, his voice turning cold and calculating. The recording ended. I sat in my living room, tears streaming down my face, understanding finally what Mark's real plan had been. He hadn't come back because he loved Isabella. He had come back because he knew she was dying, and he wanted to position himself to claim her fortune. He had been planning this for months. Maybe longer. You planned this, I whispered to the empty room. But you have no idea who you're dealing with. The next few weeks were a blur of investigation and preparation. Emma hired a private investigator to dig into Mark's background. What we found made me sick to my stomach. Mark Ellison was a professional predator. Over the past 10 years, he had targeted at least 6 women. Always successful businesswomen or widows with substantial assets. Always the same pattern: charm them, gain their trust, gain access to their finances, and then disappear with whatever he could steal. Linda Morales was a widow in Phoenix whose husband had left her a successful restaurant chain. Mark dated her for 8 months, convinced her to add his name to several business accounts, and then vanished with $30,000. Jessica Chin was a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco. Mark posed as a venture capitalist, seduced her, and walked away with her prototype designs and $50,000 in development funds. Rebecca Williams owned a chain of yoga studios in Denver. Mark became her business partner, convinced her to take out loans for expansion, and disappeared with the money before the studios could be built. The pattern was always the same. Find a successful woman. Make her fall in love. Gain access to her money. Steal whatever he could and disappear before she could stop him. But Isabella had been different. She had been young and trusting when he first targeted her, but after he abandoned her, she had become suspicious and careful. He hadn't been able to get close to her again while she was healthy. So he had waited. He had waited until she was dying, until she was weak and scared and vulnerable, and then he had tried to worm his way back into her life. When that didn't work, he decided to claim her estate after her death. Linda Morales agreed to testify against Mark. So did Jessica Chin. Rebecca Williams was still too traumatized to face him in court, but she provided a written statement and financial records. "He told me he loved me," Linda said during our phone call. "He said he wanted to help me expand the restaurants. He seemed so genuine, so caring. I had been lonely since my husband died, and Mark made me feel beautiful and desired again." "How did you find out he was lying?" "He asked me to wire money to an account for new kitchen equipment. $50,000. When I called the equipment company to check on the delivery, they had never heard of Mark Ellison. By the time I realized what had happened, he was gone." Each story was heartbreaking. Each story was proof that Mark was not a grieving lover trying to claim his rightful inheritance, but a con artist who had been planning to steal from Isabella long before she died. Emma compiled affidavits, bank records, police reports from the women who had filed charges against Mark. We had emails showing his attempts to reconnect with Isabella, phone records proving his calls had started only after her cancer diagnosis became public knowledge, and witness statements from Isabella's employees and friends. 2 days before the court hearing, I stood in my daughter's empty office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The office had been left exactly as Isabella had arranged it, her design sketches pinned to boards on the walls, fabric samples arranged on her desk, photos of her successful fashion shows displayed on shelves. This was what she had built. This was her legacy. And I would be damned if I let Mark Ellison destroy it. "He thinks I'm just an old woman," I said to Emma, who had come to review our final arguments. "He's about to meet the wrong mom." The courtroom was packed. Word had gotten out about the case, the $37 million inheritance battle, as the newspapers called it. Local news crews were there, fashion industry reporters, even some of Isabella's former employees who had taken time off work to support me. Mark sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney, a slick-looking man in an even slicker suit. Mark was wearing navy blue instead of black today, trying to look like a respectable businessman instead of the predator I knew him to be. His lawyer stood up first, painting a picture of Mark as a heartbroken lover who had been reconciling with Isabella before her death. My client and Isabella Thompson had been in regular contact for months before her passing, the attorney said smoothly. They had discussed marriage, discussed combining their business interests. Under Illinois domestic partnership law, Mr. Ellison has a clear legal claim to a portion of Ms. Thompson's estate. He presented carefully selected emails and text messages, taking conversations out of context to make it seem like Isabella had welcomed Mark back into her life. Then it was Emma's turn. "Your Honor," Emma said, her voice carrying the authority of 15 years as a top estate attorney. "The plaintiff abandoned Isabella Thompson 9 years ago when she was pregnant with his child. He stole $60,000 from her business account and disappeared overnight. Any recent contact was not motivated by love, but by greed." Emma played the recording Isabella had made of her meeting with Mark. His own words filled the courtroom. "Your mother's an old woman. She can't run a multi-million-dollar company. Then maybe your mother will be more reasonable." You could hear the gasps from the gallery. The calculation in his voice was unmistakable. This was not a man speaking about the woman he loved. This was a predator discussing his next target. But the most damning evidence came next. Emma called Linda Morales to the stand. Linda was in her 60s, a dignified woman who spoke clearly about how Mark had seduced and robbed her. Then Jessica Chin testified via video link from San Francisco, describing the same pattern of lies and theft. By the time Emma presented the financial records showing Mark's other scams, his attorney was looking panicked. "But I wasn't done yet." Emma called me to the stand, and I walked slowly to the witness chair, carrying with me 9 years of grief and rage and determination. "Mrs. Thompson," Emma said gently, "please tell the court about your daughter's relationship with the plaintiff." I looked directly at Mark as I spoke, watching his face as I destroyed his lies one by one. "He left my daughter pregnant, bankrupt, and alone," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "She miscarried because of the stress he caused. She spent 9 years rebuilding her life, her business, and her heart after what he did to her." "Did your daughter ever express any desire to reconcile with Mr. Ellison?" "Never. She recorded their final meeting because she was afraid of him. She knew he was after her money, and she wanted proof of his real intentions." "What did Isabella say about protecting her legacy?" I pulled out the letter Isabella had written me in her final weeks, her handwriting shaky, but her words clear. She wrote, "Mom, I built this company from nothing after Mark destroyed my life. Every dollar I earned without his help. If he ever tries to claim what I built, remember that he forfeited any right to my love or my money the night he abandoned me." The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped taking notes, caught up in the raw emotion of a mother defending her daughter's memory. Then Emma presented the final piece of evidence. "Your Honor, we have recently learned that Mr. Ellison is currently under investigation by the FBI for mail fraud and wire fraud in connection with his other victims." The courtroom erupted. Mark's attorney was on his feet, objecting, but Emma was already handing documents to the judge. "Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI Financial Crimes Unit is here today with a warrant for Mr. Ellison's arrest." The courtroom doors opened, and a federal agent walked in, followed by 2 Chicago police officers. Mark turned around, his face going white as he saw his other victims sitting in the gallery behind me. Linda Morales, Jessica Chin, who had flown in from San Francisco that morning, Rebecca Williams, who had found the courage to face him after all. His smug smile vanished instantly. For the first time since this nightmare began, Mark Ellison looked scared. Judge Patricia Harrison was a 60-year-old woman who had built her career on protecting the rights of fraud victims. She looked at Mark with the same disgust I felt. "Mr. Ellison," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos in the courtroom, "I have reviewed the evidence presented today. The recordings, the financial documents, the testimony of multiple victims. This court finds that you have no legitimate claim to Isabella Thompson's estate." Mark started to stand, but his attorney pulled him back down. "Furthermore," Judge Harrison continued, "this court finds clear evidence of fraud, coercion, and attempted extortion. All claims against the Thompson estate are denied with prejudice." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. "Additionally, this court is ordering a criminal investigation into your activities, Mr. Ellison." You will remain in custody pending arraignment on federal fraud charges. Agent Martinez stepped forward with handcuffs. Mark looked around the courtroom desperately, as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to run. As the handcuffs clicked into place, he turned to glare at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. I stood up, walked over to him, and looked him directly in the eyes. "Yes, it is," I whispered. "This was for Isabella. And she won." The bailiff led him away, and I watched him go with a satisfaction deeper than anything I had ever felt. Not just because I had won, but because I had kept my promise to my daughter. Emma hugged me as the courtroom emptied, reporters shouting questions, Isabella's employees cheering, and Mark's other victims crying with relief. "You did it, Margaret," Emma said. "You protected everything she built." But as I walked out of that courthouse, I realized something important. I hadn't just protected Isabella's legacy, I had discovered my own strength. For 67 years, I had been Margaret the teacher, Margaret the mother, Margaret the caretaker. Today, I had become Margaret the fighter. 6 months later, I was standing in the lobby of the Isabella Hope Foundation, watching young women pitch their business ideas to a panel of successful entrepreneurs. I had used Isabella's fortune to create something she would have loved, a foundation that provided business grants and mentorship to single mothers trying to start their own companies. Women who had been abandoned, betrayed, or left to raise children alone. Women who needed a second chance to build something beautiful from the ashes of their broken dreams. Linda Morales had become the foundation's first volunteer coordinator. Jessica Chen was mentoring our tech entrepreneurs. Even Rebecca Williams had joined us, using her experience with Mark to help other women recognize the warning signs of financial predators. The first grant recipient was Maria Santos, a 24-year-old mother of 2 who had been abandoned by her boyfriend when she was pregnant with her second child. With our help, she had opened a small bakery in Pilsen that was already turning a profit. "Mrs. Thompson," Maria said, showing me photos of her children decorating cupcakes in her shop, "I named my bakery Isabella's Kitchen." "I hope that's okay." "It's perfect," I said, tears in my eyes. "She would have loved that you're creating something sweet from something that started bitter." As I watched these women pursue their dreams with the same fierce determination that had driven Isabella, I realized something profound. Mark had tried to take $37 million in greed, but Isabella's legacy had become something worth far more, hope for women who had been told they weren't strong enough, smart enough, or deserving enough to build their own empires. Mark was serving 18 months in federal prison for wire fraud and tax evasion. His other victims had testified at his sentencing, and several more women had come forward with their own stories of his financial abuse. He would be closely monitored by probation officers for years after his release, his ability to target vulnerable women severely limited. But more importantly, he had been exposed. His name and photo had been in newspapers across the country. His methods had been dissected in articles about financial fraud. Other women would recognize his techniques before he could hurt them. Sometimes I still visited Isabella's grave, bringing fresh flowers and updates about the foundation. I would tell her about the women we had helped, the businesses we had funded, the dreams we had made possible. "He came for fortune," I would whisper, placing roses on her headstone, but met a mother's fury. "He thought grief made me weak, but love made me unstoppable." The last time I visited, I found a small bouquet of wildflowers on Isabella's grave that I hadn't left there. There was a note attached. "Thank you for protecting what she built. Because of you, my daughter will grow up knowing that strong women don't let bad men win." Maria Santos. I smiled, thinking about Isabella's letter, her final request that I protect her legacy. I had done more than protect it, I had multiplied it, shared it, turned her individual success into a movement that would help women for generations to come. Standing there in the cemetery where this whole battle had begun, I made one final promise to my daughter. Your legacy isn't just about the money you made or the business you built. It's about the strength you showed, the way you fought back after being betrayed, the way you turned pain into power. And now other women will learn that strength too. A warm breeze rustled the flowers on Isabella's grave, and for a moment, I felt her presence beside me again. Not the weak, dying woman from the hospital, but the fierce entrepreneur who had built an empire from nothing. The daughter who had taught her mother that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight for love, not money. Mark Ellison had thought he could steal from a dead woman and intimidate a grieving mother. Instead, he had awakened a force he never saw coming, the unstoppable power of a mother's love combined with a daughter's legacy. And that force had changed everything. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that strength can come from the most unexpected places, if it showed you that love is always more powerful than greed, then I want you to remember something. When someone tries to take what doesn't belong to them, when they think your grief makes you weak, when they believe your age makes you helpless, they have no idea what they're dealing with. Because sometimes, the most dangerous opponent is a mother who has nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. Mark thought he could walk into my daughter's funeral and walk away with her fortune. Instead, he walked into a trap set by love, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. He came expecting to find a victim. But when a mother swears to protect her child's legacy, no devil walks away smiling. And that's a promise you can take to the bank. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of justice. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because I want to know that somewhere out there, other mothers and daughters are learning that they're stronger than they know. Remember, they may underestimate you, but they'll never do it twice. This was Margaret Thompson, and this was how I turned my daughter's funeral into her final victory.